All right, so let's get started with our first session. As you've all noticed, if you've looked at the backdrop or at the cover of your program today, the theme is making change in a changing landscape. And we're going to, over the next couple of days, discuss a lot of very natural challenges and obstacles that we face here in Washington, D.C. at the federal level. And we're going to explore some ways that we can make real opportunities there, make progress despite these challenges. But today for our first panel, we're going to focus on things that are happening at the local level and at the state level, specifically looking at campaigns for expanding affordable housing funding. We're going to highlight some best practices in organizing and really try to connect the ways that you can make change in your community outside of just the work that we do here in DC. I'm joined by several very distinguished panelists, and I'll introduce them from my right to left. Michael Anderson at the Center for Community Change is the director of their Housing Trust Fund project. Phyllis Chamberlain, the executive director of Housing Alliance Pennsylvania. Fredricka Robinson, a resident leader with East Bay Housing Organizations in Oakland, California. And Greg Payne with the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition, the director there. So with little further ado, because we want to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion, I'd like to kick it off by turning things over to Michael Anderson to talk about some trust fund progress.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon. Sorry, I'm from the West Coast, so I'm so confused about what time it is here. Those of you on the West Coast here, you know that feeling right now as well, and this afternoon. So I'm very pleased to be up here today to share with you what I think is quite a hopeful path for us to concentrate on in these times where much of what we need to think about is the defense that we need to all mount against the things that we hold dear. But let me start by saying I'm going to quote something that my executive director, Deepak Bhargava at the Center for Community Change has been saying. He said, yes, we must fight like AG double hockey pucks, right? We must do that. We must do that. But at the same time, we must lay the groundwork for the future victories we seek, especially at this moment where so many people in our community who may have never before thought they wanted to get involved with advocacy are looking for ways to get involved. Because the best way to get people more deeply involved is to have them experience a win. And whereas we may not get the wins we seek at the federal level for a bit of time now, that the opportunities at the state and local level not only are happening, but are something that we can increase the magnitude, not just of policy victories, but as a vehicle to get more people engaged in the type of change we see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through some of the things that have just happened in 2016 at the state and local level, and then I'm going to lift up a couple points that I think are relevant to all of us as we think about how this might apply to our own communities. The first thing, and let me be very clear, when I talk about these victories, some of them I've had the privilege to work with these campaigns, but really all of these wins are about the state and local advocates and what they do. We've seen in 2016 new housing trust funds, which means new dedicated funding for affordable housing, created in Denver, Colorado, Baltimore, Maryland, where 83% of the voters said yes to a housing trust fund, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the city council acted unanimously to create a trust fund, and in Vancouver, Washington, which is a city some of you may be less familiar with, but historically it's not a city that votes in favor of taxes. 57% of their people came out and voted on a tax on themselves to create a housing trust fund. Among existing housing trust funds, Los Angeles County made a historic $300 million commitment. Oakland, California enacted a housing impact fee that when developers are doing new development, they have to make contributions to affordable housing. Evansville, Indiana found $500,000 for their housing trust fund, the first new investment in that in over a decade. Louisville, Kentucky, Portland, Oregon, Nashville, Tennessee, Austin, Texas, Seattle, Washington, Miami-Dade County, all of them had historical years in terms of new revenue that they were bringing into affordable housing. We saw similar trends at the state level. The state of Arizona nearly doubling the amount of revenue going into affordable housing after 7 or 8 years of the legislature raiding their existing trust fund. Similar success story in Florida with $214 million being allocated last year, way up from what advocates have been fighting for the last couple years. North Carolina's at historic highs. Virginia got to historic highs. And now we have very exciting campaigns in Ohio and South Dakota that are looking to make significant increases to their existing trust funds. You notice some of these states are not the quote-unquote blue states. That should tell us all something. There are victories to be won even when the politics on the surface level says our work is impossible. So I want to lift up a couple trends, as I said, before I pass on the mic to the rest of the panel here. First, I want to lift up voters are so much farther ahead than our elected leaders on this issue. As a matter of fact, we tracked 39 ballot measures in 2016 that were to put more revenue or create a housing trust fund on the ballot. 32 of those passed. 25 of them passed, which is over 60% of the vote. That's not even close, right? There's something here for us to build on. That's something for us to know. Another trend that I wanted to lift up is not only have cities been able to win advances to get funding for affordable housing, but many cities are now going after multiple funding sources. Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Oakland, California. I know it sounds very much West Coast party right now, but the point is that what's going on in those West Coast cities is worth paying attention to. And in fact, I'm working with groups in Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Miami-Dade County seeking to get multiple revenue sources for their trust funds. Again, this is a trend that we can build on and we need to build on. Another thing that we're seeing is that suburban cities and smaller cities that may have never thought of themselves being in the position to go after local funding are either making significant steps forward or beginning to contemplate and make those moves. You know, I talked about the success at the ballot. That included Summit County, Colorado, a place by many other measures very, very conservative. Well, voters stepped up to the ballot to tax themselves. That tells us something about what the public gets and elected officials don't, even in rural communities. Finally, or I shouldn't say finally, a couple more things I want to lift up. All these campaigns that are winning have very disciplined, effective communication strategies where they're drawing on the decade plus of great research and information that's done here and putting it into play in real time to change the conversation with their elected officials, with the media, and frankly with their fellow community members. The other things that worth noting is in these local victories as well, you know, we talk a lot about, well, there's a connection between housing and health. There's a connection between housing and education. In these local coalitions, they figured out how to bring that together for people working for policy change. Not just putting out a paper, but saying, let's get a policy in place that actually improves how kids do in school, that gives our seniors the chance to enjoy their golden age. And then finally, I want to lift up something that I'm very excited about and that happy to be on the panel with Fredricka, who's a member of Residents United Network in California. The state of California and the nonprofit community there has come to the realization that they have more than 1 million people who live in affordable subsidized housing in California. And rather than thinking of, oh, these are the people we're helping, saying, wait a second, these are the people who need to be at the table with us, leading the call for policy change. And we're seeing that in California. We're beginning to see that grow in Washington. And we think it's a model worth building on in states around the country. So as much as we are in a very difficult time at the federal level, I will tell you there are some bright lights in our local communities and in our states that we need to build on. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. That was really great. I'd just like to remind everyone, we'll do questions and discussion after all the panelists have spoken briefly. So if you have questions as any one of the speakers is presenting, feel free to jot that down. You should all have notepads at your tables to do so. Phyllis Chamberlain will talk to us about something that's been very pressing for many of us, which is finding success across the political spectrum from elected officials. So I'll turn it over to Phyllis now.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So in late 2015, 242 out of 243 members of the Republican-controlled Pennsylvania General Assembly voted yes to dedicate a funding source for the State Housing Trust Fund. I love saying that, so now I'm going to say it a different way. All but one of 243 members of the Pennsylvania General Assembly agreed that not only was affordable housing a worthy investment, they actually voted to dedicate funding towards it. On November 5th, 2015, Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf signed the bill into law, which provided for the first time statewide funding for the State Housing Trust Fund. This year is the first year that there's money available. This year there's $12.5 million available for the entire state, and it's projected to grow to $25 million in the next few years. A lot of the success of this campaign and the victory was a result of just good old-fashioned grit, but it was also the product of a very well thought out strategy for how we build bipartisan support. So I'm going to talk about what we found critical and what we continue to find critical in terms of building bipartisan support to be successful at winning money at the state and local levels. Let's just start with some basic math. If there are more Republicans, then we need more Republican votes. Okay. And often what I think of when I'm thinking about working with legislators is I actually found one day that I was imagining a white line and elected officials were on one side of it. And sometimes it seems that we can't get any of them to cross that white line. But what we found is that as soon as one of them crossed that white line, it was much easier to get others to follow. Many of us look to our peers for how we behave and how we act, and elected officials are really no different, with an important point. Elected officials look to members of their own party for what's a safe issue and what's an issue that they should support. So unfortunately, if we have 100 co-sponsors of legislation, and they're all Democrats except for 3, that generally is seen then as a partisan issue, and I've found, and I'm sure that many of you have found too, that it just becomes even harder to get the other party to co-sponsor that bill. So we really focused on making sure that we were focusing on the party that was the majority in the legislature and getting more of them to support the bill. So that's easier said than done, right? So let me talk a little bit about the multiple strategies that we employed to make that happen. First, it very much matters what we say. There are some messages that historically resonate more with Republicans than other messages. So this is a bit of a stereotype, right? But we know that there is some truth in some stereotypes. So what we really focused on were messages around the cost. We produced a number of white papers that focused on the economic impact of creating more affordable housing, but also what are the costs of doing nothing. So we focused on these facts: that the Housing Trust Fund would spur nearly $60 million in economic impact each year. It would add up to 500 jobs and an additional $2.9 million in state tax revenues. So just because we're asking to spend more money doesn't mean that the policy isn't going to save money in other areas. The costs of doing nothing included the overuse of hospital emergency rooms, poor health, which we know is a consequence of poor quality housing, and for some populations experiencing homelessness, there's data that shows that the lack of quality, safe, and affordable housing for them means that their incarceration rate goes up. So the consequences of doing nothing actually carry real costs and real burdens to these other systems. When we think about what to say, we must also point to the solutions that the enactment of this policy will bring about. So sometimes we just point to other projects that are in the community that are providing affordable housing and a better quality of life. But in our case, there was actually a state housing trust fund with money for some counties. And we were able to point to those examples. So a few years before this big win, we had been successful in creating the trust fund, so creating the program and the framework. And then a few years later, we also had been successful in securing a funding source. It wasn't for the whole state. It was a portion of the impact fees for Marcellus Shale, which is natural gas drilling. And the counties that were impacted by Marcellus Shale were able to secure money through the Housing Trust Fund for affordable housing. So we had examples to point to. We also, though, had legislators who had seen the impact of this policy and this funding in their counties and communities. And it was actually one of the legislators, Republican, in one of the rural communities that became the lead sponsor for the bill to expand it across the state, because he saw in very real terms the impact that the State Housing Trust Fund was having in his community. So I just talked a lot about what you say, but it also matters who says it. Advocacy works by mobilizing the grassroots. We know that. And a general definition of grassroots is to mobilize people power and to focus on getting as many people as we possibly can to speak up and to act. Grass tops, in comparison, is working with people that already have existing relationships with elected officials. And all the strategies I'm going to talk about were probably equally important. This one, I think, was critically important. We focused on building relationships with legislators, but relationships take time. And so it's just quicker if you can identify folks that already have a relationship with particular elected officials. Those elected officials, if they know those folks, already trust them, trust being a pretty important component of any relationship. And so we were able to secure some of our initial support, which then got those other elected officials to cross that white line. We were able to secure that by working with folks that already had a relationship with those elected officials. So when we think about who delivers the message, we also have to think about who might oppose the policy. And I think sometimes we're tempted not to talk to the people that might oppose the policy and hope that they might not notice what we're doing. But that doesn't always work. So we really thought about which groups might oppose this policy, and would it be possible for us to convince them not to? When we thought about the different funding sources, and this funding source is actually a portion of the realty transfer tax, when we thought about the different funding sources, we ruled out one or two because we weren't sure that we could get the group that probably would oppose it not to do so. The realty transfer tax, as many of you know, is sometimes opposed by the Realtors Association. But we had a really good relationship with them. And instead of not talking to them and crossing our fingers that they wouldn't notice, which would never have been possible, instead we went to them and we talked to them about what we were trying to do. We also did that before we went public, so they were part of the process. We talked to them about the need, although I think they were pretty well aware of the need. But what we also did was identify some issues where they actually wanted our support too. And what we were successful in doing is not getting them to support it, but not getting them to oppose it. And that was very, very critical. And like I said, we already had some relationship with them, but we looked at how could we help each other and how could we do a bit of a trade-off. So that was pretty critical. So I've talked about what you say and who says it. It's also pretty important how you say it. So this is my personal experience that I liken this to. How many of us have had a family member or a friend who marries or partners with someone that we absolutely can't stand?
Well,
Pretty universal, yes. Pretty universal experience. So I had one particular friend whose husband I absolutely could not stand. And my dislike of him was very, very obvious. And what became very clear to me is that by speaking my mind and not really thinking about how I said things to him, I was hurting my relationship with my friend. There are members of Congress that we just all don't always agree with. But speaking our mind doesn't always get us what we want. So I'm not saying that we should agree where we don't agree. But the foundation of an effective relationship is about respect. And so if we can be respectful, recognize that we're not always going to agree on everything, but really seek out the areas of common agreement, then we will be more successful. Some of us, that's very hard to do. So based on your personality, this might be really easy or fairly difficult. So as you can see, there were a variety of strategies that we used. We also did mobilize. We did call-in days. We did meetings in the districts. We did tours of programs. We did all of that too. And I'm not really sure that any of them were more important than the other, except for these last two, which is patience and persistence. We were working on this for a very long time. I know that many of you here have victories that you were also working on for a very long time before you were successful in achieving it. But it's patience and persistence, and like I said, good old-fashioned grit that eventually gets us to where we need to be. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. We are now going to talk a little bit about the importance of, as Phyllis was talking, sometimes who carries the message and who says it when we're doing our advocacy campaigns. I know that many of you had the opportunity to participate in the residence session we did this morning because at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, we're always looking for ways to further involve the voices and expertise of low-income renters themselves. You'll see in your program today an insert about our organizing awards that will be presented tomorrow, and we'll be presenting those to the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California and also East Bay Housing Organizations. We're very fortunate to have from East Bay Housing Organizations in Oakland, California, Fredricka Robinson, who will talk a little bit about the effective resident organizing they did and her role in it, and share with us some perspectives on how to use that in local organizing.
And thank you, Michael, and thank you, Joey, and thank you, Phyllis. My goodness, first and foremost, East Bay Housing Organization is the people that send me here, but I'm no way on staff, and I get paid $1 from them. So I just want y'all to know that. I represent myself and the community that are in affordable housing. Mm-hmm. Today I come here, I am here and present. It brings me great joy to be here. I am truly grateful for all the friends who have passed away and those whose voices are not heard today. I give homage to my God, my parents, and to my ancestors, and to my brothers and my sisters. Specifically, I'm truly grateful to be on this panel today, and I am very proud of this conference organizer and the National Low Income Coalition. East Bay Housing Organization, NIMI, thank you, and for providing me my way here. I'm all the way from Oakland, California. It is for their hard work, I must say that, and the board of directors. I'm sure there's a will and there must be a way. So, and to the silent voices that are not here today, I am here representing them all. And with great joy, over 10 years of pain, sweat and tears, agony of defeat, did not deter me from staying out of prison. And it was a constant reminder I was positive, there was a positive outlook. 2 years ago, I became the thrill of victory, my own. 1 bedroom, a choice voucher, Section 8. And thank you. That was a Hopper unit. I'm housing opportunity with a person living here with AIDS for over 23 years. That's the number 2. And let's see. This was the most recently built affordable housing in Oakland, California. So of 5,000 applicants, I got one of those 200. Here's a God. Thank you. Because of that, I wrote a little something to commemorate this day. Win righteously, we win. Love wins. Our team wins. And we are champions. We give thanks to our allies, ancestors, and angels. To the billions on our side, we give thanks to the element. The earth, the wind, and the fire, we give thanks to the element. We give because the hurricanes, the monsoons, and the tsunamis are all on our side. The waters, thunder, and lightning are all on our side. All the fruitful and generous trees are on our side. All the oceans and rivers and streams, lakes and seas are on our side. All the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the winged creatures are on our side. All the ants, termites, insects, critters are on our side. The trillions of little entities on the planet are on our side. Venus, Jupiter, and Mars are all the planets. Sun, the moon, and the stars are on our side. The universe is on our side. All of the creations is on our side. And with that, we thank you. So now, thank you. So now I move to the recent, like I said, that I got involved with the Affordable Housing Act, or the A1 measure bond for Alameda County. And when I say Alameda County, people have to realize that Alameda is not just Oakland. Alameda, the Bay Area, is very unique. We have Emeryville, Berkeley, San Leandro, Hayward, Dublin, Pleasanton, and Union City, and Fremont. And of all of those cities represent Alameda County, there was a $500 million bond that was supposed to be voted on by the voters of Alameda County, which is me. I'm a voter. And of that money, they was going to receive, I think it was going in a big pot, and it gets split among the cities. It was supposed to be $425 million, of which goes to affordable housing. So I learned this process. It was the whole process of coming to this, working with East Bay, is that you got to have the money first before you do anything. So today, I'm finding about policy. So I'm learning on the ground, that I realize that, well, you guys make me feel special, but I mean, thank you very much for that. But I have to feel special within myself, and I do. I'm just very grateful. So with that being said, is that the committee was other residents that lived in other affordable housing. So I was able to meet other people that was in affordable housing, like seniors. And then another part of our committee was that we had to go out and we had to do some presentations. So no problem for me, of course. I'm me right here as you see me, live and in person. So we went there. People of Chinese descent, we had interpreters. You know, the Bay Area is unique. We don't just have one color. We have people of other colors, they say. And we have all people, size and shapes and all that too, like me. So I represent, I don't know what I represent, but I represent a lot of people. So I know that evidently there's somebody telling me I should be here. So with all that being said, I smile every day. That's important. And when I got on that committee, I said, well, you know, they lost it. I don't know anything about the past. I don't even know when I stepped in there. I said, we're going to win. And did I even know that it did win resoundingly? We don't have this lie. 75.7% of the voters of Alameda County voted for this. So I step out of my apartment. I have a key. But there's so many people that don't have a key. And this really disturbs me because in my county, on the area I live, we have areas where there's things going on with tents and the sanitation issues. So a lot of more things start to come up. And when you asked me, Joey, about, you know, why are you here? And I was on the phone when we were doing lobby day. I did lobby day as well, Sacramento, was that you can have a point of view of, you can have an optimistic point of view. Like you say, Democrat, Republican, you don't have to agree with everything. But when I had a friend tell me on the phone, he said, well, things are not going to change. So I'm the type of person that said, thank you very much. And I don't have to have that point of view. So my point of view was don't have a pessimistic point of view. So the point of view is that I wanted that you don't have to take that road. So being that part of not having that kind of negative point of view, I try to have a positive point of view. There's so many more negatives that we can focus on, but I'm not here for that. I'm here to show you that if a group of people get together, like our rally on A1, when you get together, I kicked off that rally, I told you my story, I said, when I told you 23 years, and then finally it took me a decade, a long time for somebody to get an affordable housing. And with the money I get, there's other problems, so because of Social Security. So being disabled on that, there's mental health issues. There's mental health issues one have to deal with. There's a whole host of things that encompass not just getting affordable housing. You have people out there who have drug issues. You have people who have so many issues. And so we have to say, let me see if I can find out what's going on. So that's going to be a whole nother story. 2 minutes. The JJ issue that I covered was protecting Oakland renters. There was what I'm finding out in certain towns, we had 2 fires, unfortunately. We had 2 fires that have something to do with housing, and this is more recently, and so that's affecting us too. And people are getting burned up. And so JJ is protecting renters, and that was a petition to give them, the landlords were not to, because we have lots of evictions going on, so people won't fight back. So that was to give them an increase, that was to give them the rent control from the inflation of that. I think I discussed that.
Thank you, Fredricka.
You're welcome.
That was great. Okay, so we'll turn now to our last panelist, and then we'll do some questions and discussions. Greg Payne from the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition will talk a little bit about how sometimes victory is a bit of a process, and how we can connect our local campaigns with some of the federal work. Take it away, Greg.
Thank you. So this works. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Greg Payne. I run the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition, and I do sit on the board of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition as well. I do want to kind of call out and appreciate the fact that there are staff and interns all around this room and outside this room who are making this all work. They tend to make it work seamlessly every year over the course of 4 days worth of meetings, and for residents and state coalitions, and a forum and an award ceremony, and there's a whole lot that goes into that for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they do it incredibly well, and I just want to give them the applause I think they deserve. I understand that this room is full of people who have worked on campaigns that have succeeded at the local and statewide level, and it's hard to assume that strategies that work in one area are necessarily going to work in another area, obviously, because politics are different, personalities are much different. But I do think that there are some principles that can be fairly broadly applied. And so, I want to talk just a little bit about a couple of bond campaigns that our coalition has worked on in recent years, just because we've done, a lot more than the bond campaigns, but I do feel like those were particularly instructive from my own understanding of what principles are particularly helpful in growing our coalition and in long-term success. Back in 2007, our coalition comprised of about 25 organizations, mostly in Portland, kind of the real housers from right around that group, and we met monthly, shared information with each other, and spent a lot of time, I think, complaining about whatever it was the state finance agency was doing at the time, but didn't have a whole lot of relevance or resonance, I don't think, with our state legislature. And I don't think we had much energy or momentum. And that really began to change in 2008 when we made a conscious decision to sort of step outside of our familiar box and partner with the construction and architectural and engineering sectors on a statewide bond campaign for affordable housing for families and for seniors that would create hundreds and hundreds of units across the state, but also create jobs at a time when our economy desperately needed it. And that process was a little awkward at first. We didn't know each other very well, but over time we became more familiar with each other and comfortable with each other. And I kind of at first had the sense that we were onto something when, as a group, we walked into a meeting with our state legislative leadership, and the majority leader walked into the room and he sort of said, "I don't know what all of you people are here to talk to me about, but I love the fact that you're all here." And obviously, the reason he was saying that was because, that particular group of people doesn't customarily all get together in the same room and sing off the same song sheet. And ultimately, we won that campaign, and it was the single largest investment in affordable housing in our state's history. And after we won, I remember our lobbyist turned to me and he said, "Greg, remember that success has a lot of parents, and failure is an orphan." And I remember thinking, that is a really weird thing to say to me, dude. But I have to say, over the ensuing years, as these properties got built all around the state, and people got housed, and contractors and architects and engineers got work, our membership grew from 25 organizations to 125 organizations. And, from a range of geographies and a range of sectors. And, that growth and that energy ended up leading to a second bond campaign just a couple of years ago, this time focused on dealing with our state's lack of affordable housing for our seniors. Maine is the oldest state in the country, and there continues to be a lot of political will around that issue. And so we won that campaign too in the end. And in addition to a House Speaker as our champion who worked it hard, I think the two reasons we won that campaign is one, we built on the strategy that won so well the first time, which is this coalition of organization across sectors, which resonated and made life easier for legislators who could work with a range of groups all at the same time. And in addition to those same groups, we had aging and senior organizations kind of on the train the second go-round. And secondly, we got a whole lot of Republican support as well. And we did that by connecting our issues and our initiative with the real severe isolation that a whole lot of seniors in rural communities across the state feel. And ultimately, we ended up putting a particular requirement that there be a certain number of properties built through that bond measure in rural counties. I will also say there was a significant difference in that second campaign in that it was a general obligation bond campaign, which in Maine means that you not only have to get 2/3 support of the legislature, you have to go to the ballot box for the people to vote to accept or reject it. And so, in November of 2015, 70% of Maine voters approved this senior affordable housing bond, which was the largest measure of approval of any bond issue outside of transportation in the last decade. And, that 70% figure, and by the way, there was no county that was under 60%, that 70% figure sort of became instantly an indisputable marker of the kind of support that this issue had across the state. And so I say that in part because, I think if you have the opportunity to go to the ballot, and folks here have talked about this a little bit, if you think you can do it and you think you can win, the upside can be a whole lot more than just the immediate question at hand. It can be the foundation for your work, and you're able to easily demonstrate to lawmakers the level of support for the issue. And so I do highly recommend it. It's something we'll be able to kind of breathe off of for quite some time. Now that campaign, kind of as Joey alluded to, isn't quite over yet because our governor, Governor Paul LePage, is a special man.
That's one way to put it.
And he has refused to sell those bonds on Wall Street. He tells us that he thinks that people didn't know what they were doing when they voted for that bond. And, You know, the truth is, I suspect, you know, many of us believe the real issue here is that our legislative champion was the House Speaker, who was his chief political rival. And that's, I think, really the issue going on here. The governor's position, obviously, is very problematic for people within, legislators within his own party, and let alone members of the Democratic Party. The mic off?
Can we get Greg a third microphone? No. Right.
Does this work?
Give it a second.
Hello?
Number 4 is on the microphone.
I'm giving it number 2.
Okay, number 2.
Okay.
There we go.
Right. Right, let it be shown this is Ed's fault. I guess, you know, obviously, this presents an opportunity for us now, despite the governor's absurd position, in that the press wants to talk about this. It's an absurd position to take. It's facilitated a bonding, honestly, with many members of the Republican caucus that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And so, you know, we're kind of doing our best right now to make the most of that. There is a bill being heard next Wednesday in our state house, sponsored by Republicans, that would go around the governor and get that bond released despite him. And, you know, I think it has a very good chance of succeeding. So I'm going to wind up here. I guess I just want to say, in all of this, sort of the big 3 things that I took away from the experience of these 2 campaigns. One is that, you know, I think we have to be self-aware enough to understand that oftentimes there aren't enough of us. Our voice isn't loud enough to win on our own. The importance of developing partnerships outside our immediate sector is critical. And I think it's not just the right thing to do. Frankly, I often think it's the only way to end up gaining success. The second thing that I would take away from all this is that I've learned winning really matters. And you know, obviously, we're not going to win everything we pursue, but I think it becomes really important to be strategic about the policy priorities that we take on and make sure at least some of them we can win. Because, you know, tilting windmills has some attractiveness maybe at some level, but it's no way to maintain and grow a coalition or a movement or a campaign. And so I think it's critical that we make sure that we pick off some things that can win too. Winning is energizing. Losing certainly is not. And the last thing I want to say is I think we have to take extra pain to make sure that we are nonpartisan in all we do. Because whether it's fair or not, I think our issue has been put in the Democratic box, I mean capital D, Democratic Party box. And so I think Republicans who, you know, may have their own objections on philosophical grounds, now also have objections on political grounds. And so I think it behooves us to sort of, you know, always be thinking about what are we doing to help proactively bring Republicans into the fold and help them understand and reach out in good faith to say that, you know, this issue is not a Democratic Party issue. It's a human issue. And we need their involvement and want their involvement and engagement going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you to this wonderful panel who did a great job. I believe we have plenty of time for a few questions. As Paul mentioned earlier, we've got some folks with microphones who will be sort of moving throughout the room, and I'll sort of direct our mic runners, and then if you could stand, just say your name, where you're from, and ask your question. It looks like our first one is here on the right side of the room, Elaine. I don't know if you can get there.
Vic Bach, Community Service Society, New York City. Thanks for the upbeat news about the growth of local and state housing trust funds. But I was wondering what portion of those funds is targeted to low-income or poor households? And I was also wondering whether any of them are going to help preserve public housing, which nationally is in a $40 billion hole.
So one of the things about state and local housing trust funds is because they're created by each state or each local jurisdiction, it's hard to paint in a broad brush who they serve. Many of the housing trust funds that I referenced that advanced in 2016 had very specific measures for serving people at or below 50% area median income and at and below 30% area median income. And so I think that there is very much an awareness in local and state communities that the greatest to serve need is the people with the very least economic means. That said, I think not all housing trust funds do drive their money to serve the lowest income, and that's something most of the partners that we work with, that's what their goal is. Sometimes in the political negotiations of figuring out what's going to move forward, the clamor for workforce housing, be it legitimate or not, gets a seat at the table. So I wish I could say it was all going down. I am not aware of state and local housing trust funds that specifically direct money to public housing. Now, public housing authorities that have developed within their housing authority the ability to develop other types of housing are able to access housing trust funds. But that's distinct from what you're identifying, which is this mess that's been created at the federal level of not fully funding the public housing authorities the way they deserve.
Would anyone else like to respond? Okay, let's see who has our next question. In the middle of the room, Ed or Marjorie?
Hi, Valerie Bashan from Sarasota, Florida. Because of all the rhetoric that's going on right now with public housing and mixed development, is it possible that resident councils can partner with other organizations and develop their own housing trust fund that will cause CBDG funds to be able to come to their organization, that they can maintain affordable housing or attainable housing? You know, they use that interchangeable. But somehow we have to try to take that piece, because we don't know what this administration will do, and if dollars are from wherever the sources may be can be put together to maintain housing that we can afford. Is that something that we could get help with doing, or some leeway into how to do it?
Well, I would say certainly there are opportunities for local resident councils to work with sometimes housing trust fund candidates, other times local advocates that work beyond just trust funds at the East Bay housing organizations. One of the examples that jumps to mind most immediately is right here in the District of Columbia. DC local government provides funding support to the housing authority so that housing that has been deemed uninhabitable can be repaired and fixed up and sort of be brought back online. So the District of Columbia local government is really focusing on making sure public housing is being utilized at 100% as part of their affordable housing strategy.
And then in Sarasota, there's a new effort by a group called Sarasota Sure, S-U-R-E. So you may be already familiar with that effort. But yeah, I would say engaging in that, they're beginning on the front end to say, what does Sarasota County need as far as more local affordable housing resources? And as I said, one nice thing about housing trust funds is they can be structured to meet local needs. So I think getting engaged in that conversation now is very timely.
Great.
I want to make
Go ahead.
a comment about, she says something about the resident council. I'm on the resident council of my complex. Getting other people involved is another thing. That's my problem. We have about 3 that really actively participate. But we don't have any choice of what the budget is. And so making that impact is what I'm learning from the East Bay Housing, to try to make some more form of how we can make an impact. I did manage to get the management to sit down and tell us what's being done. So, because my concern is keeping the complexes in somewhat of tip-top order. You know, so that's a concern because you know, for my town, there's a cleanliness issue, but that's one. But maintaining them is my other goal.
Yeah. Thanks, Fredricka. All right, question. It looks like we have one on the far end of the room. And I think that's James.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you very much for this panel. It's really great to see organizing front and center in this conversation, and I respect all the work that you guys are doing. How does our organizing change as a movement when so many of the people who we serve or we are being being attacked both by this administration and by the base street organizations that helped empower it?
Any takers?
James, I have to say, I defer to you in terms of expertise in organizing, but I think the way that I would answer that is I think that's why actual real organizing and investing in leadership development is so important. I think partly having the depth of understanding of what are these systems that we're facing, what are these challenges that we're facing, giving people the background to understand the dynamics of these systems helps people, I think, bolster themselves and understand the fight that we're all against. And so I think partly it's being open and frank and direct and having a curriculum that answers the questions that people have about, well, how do we face this time?
All right, I think Vicki has a question. Toward the front. Toward the front.
Hi, Vicki Riddle with Empower Missouri and the Kansas City, Missouri Coalition to End Homelessness. Our state of Missouri for 20 years has had a housing trust fund. But for 20 years, since the day it was passed, it has been raided by the governor for a tornado and a flood. It has been left dormant. It has never been increased even 1%. It's a small fee. It's like a $14 fee. Our main opposition to any increase in that fee, in addition to the legislature, is that we have strong realtor organizations that fight against that fee ever being increased, and in fact they constantly ask the governor, as the governors get elected, to end it. How did you that have strong support from realtors and others, are there national realty groups or organizations or builders groups that would endeavor to work with us to get our local groups to support our housing trust fund? At one point it had $5 million in it, now it has 2.3.
So we didn't work with any of the national groups. We worked with the state association, and part of what we did also was identify some of the local realtors who had relationships with us and who were going to be supportive to help with that conversation. But you know, I think that I talked a little bit about this when I talked earlier. I would say that we had also, as an organization, really built up our reputation so that the realtors and a lot of other groups saw us as being effective. So I almost want to go back to some of the things that Greg said about, you know, thinking about what are the successes in terms of a long-term campaign that you can win to really build up your effectiveness. And what I mentioned earlier too was that there were some issues that the realtors wanted our help on, and they weren't issues that we disagreed with, right? So because you can't support everything and you have to stay with your mission. But we found some common areas of agreement after a lot of work building up that relationship.
Great.
Yeah, you know, it is funny how you know, state to state the politics and the dynamics are so different. But it's interesting, in Maine, our state housing trust fund was created with the kind of partnership of the realtors, who I think realized that something needed to be done, but I think were placated in the idea that part of the funds would be used for first-time homebuyer programs. And so they saw it as going back into their work. And having them on board was key and continues to be key, even though it's kind of a minor percentage of those funds now get spent on first-time homebuyer programs. It keeps them invested, and they don't fight with us. They realize it was they kind of helped to create it in the first place. So that was key for us. And I will say, this may be something other states deal with too, but it's hard to defend your housing trust fund when you don't get to control how they spend their money. And in our state, it's often treated as a slush fund of programs with no narrative or strategy whatsoever. And it makes it very hard to defend when you're at the legislature. And so I feel like our primary battle and what we've been trying to do lately is more about trying to get our state finance agency to understand this is something that we have to defend, and we need them to be strategic about how they use those funds. So that's just what's happening here. But overall, I would just say maybe some would call it co-opting, but I do think that some of those funds being spent on first-time homebuyer programs can sort of make it easier for the realtors, I think, to be involved.
All right, thanks. Further questions? Oh, how about on this side of the room towards the front? Thank you, Ed.
I really want to go back to the very first question that was asked about preserving public housing. And the fact that, no, I'm not going to take his mic. I'm not supposed to. Can I?
Yeah. Paul would fire me if you took.
I'm supposed to take the mic. Anyway, back to the question. So you said that the federal government won't underfund public housing. I'm just going to say the same thing I said in this room for 3 years now. We advocate for affordable housing. We're advocating for all these other things. When are we going to start advocating and organizing around protecting public housing? With RED running rapid, there will be no more public housing. When are we going to organize around that?
I will say that public housing is an issue that we're going to return to it several times throughout that agenda. And I think the organizing around public housing is something that needs to be included within all of the local campaigns and all of the statewide campaigns that we're talking about. Yes, absolutely, of course. Would anyone like to offer? Any other questions at this point? It looks like we have one right in the front in the middle.
I also have that same question, and I just have a sort of depressing update factoid. Where I'm from in San Francisco, the affordable housing advocates are actively at war with public housing, which is even worse than what sounds like not even advocating for it. So yeah, that's something +1.
Are you referring to the rental assistance demonstration that's going on in San Francisco?
We have a housing trust fund, and there was a big fight over. We actually did spend housing trust fund on renovating public housing, and some of the people that represent the affordable housing developers were very critical of the mayor for doing that instead of spending it on new nonprofit, and that was just watching that was so tragic.
Right. I will say there's definitely in advocacy and organizing historic tension in terms of using local dollars on public housing. And one of the reasons that I think a lot of groups have that perspective is if public housing becomes something that mayors, governors, localities, and states are supposed to sort of maintain and take care of, it sort of releases the pressure that should be on the federal government, HUD, and federal representatives to make sure those programs are fully funded. But as I think we've been talking about, we definitely need to make sure that public housing is supported with expanded funding whenever we get the opportunity to do that. All right, I think we have time for one more question. I see one at the far side of the room.
Sorry, I was going to run this.
So my question is for Fredricka. How important is it for decision makers in affordable housing to hear from and listen to and bring to the table residents such as yourself?
Well, Does it work? Thank you. It's very important. I'm seeing that it's very important. As you see, I'm up here today. And, but the most, I've been 8 months. I've been on this just Abajo. I've gone through, I'm now in leadership training. I'm learning the whole process because the whole key is to learn this process. And the lady over here might have been coming here for 3 years, and she said she still have yet to see. I'm understanding what I haven't got to the yet to see, but I'm trying to see what all of it is all about. But it is connecting me a little better. I've also connected to my District 3 councilwoman because she came Affordable Housing Week, the mayor, all the, so yeah, I know the players of that. So taking the players is another part of it. But from there, what do you do? I went up to legislation, and like she did, we went into a Republican, and he said, oh yeah, my boss is for affordable housing. So it's what the people need is what we need to say. But I really do feel that housing should just be what every human right, as far as I'm concerned. Everybody should have somewhere to stay. It should just be America. You know, we have the money, we have so much money.
Do we have time for one more? Okay, Paul says no. All right, so I'm going to thank our panelists one last time. Outstanding work.